We're going to jump right into our third session here. And we're very grateful to our presenters, Charlie Melichar and Marah Yankey, who I think has the greatest title on earth, Deputy Director of Storytelling. That just sounds fabulous. And Charlie joins us from Foster Consulting, where he is a principal. And I actually heard him on Chris Marshall's podcast from the CMAC company. So I see some folks are still joining, but I think we can kick this off. Charlie, I believe, is here as well. Yes, there he is. So I'll turn it over to you all, and I'll get out of the way. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for having me. I'm going to get us started and then kick it over to Charlie when I'm finished. Fun story about my storyteller title. I actually have a tattoo on my arm that says storyteller, though I did have it 10 years before I got this job. And people often think that maybe I went out and got it after I got my title. So I'm having to clarify that often, but it is a fun title to have. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can get my presentation loaded here. Okay, and let me get this in present mode. Are you all seeing that all right, hopefully? Someone shout if you can't. So, all right, fabulous, thank you. I'm Marah Yankey. I'm Deputy Director of Storytelling at Indiana University. So what that means is that I lead a team of writers in our Central Communications office, and we cover various areas of the university, focused heavily on Indianapolis and Bloomington, which are our core campuses, but collaborating with our 7 other regional campuses across the state to tell stories about the wonderful things happening at the university. And we, of course, have priorities that we focus on and a strategy behind that. And we'll talk about some of that as we go through our presentation, but hopefully what I talk about today will give you some ideas to leverage in your offices. So humans really have been telling stories since we acquired language, right? Passing stories from person to person has been how we learn about each other, how we learn about the world, how we've survived at times, right? It really is what makes us human and what binds us together as a society, provides that kind of glue for cultures. And it's evolved a ton over time. So we, starting with those oral traditions, moving into written word when the printing press took off, that then kind of transitioning into broadcast era. And that's really where brands started to leverage storytelling, right? Thinking about Mad Men and the golden age of advertising. But even that was so different from today because you think about that time and many of the audiences were captive, right? Whoever could afford, whatever brand could afford the most expensive spots was getting to tell those stories. And frankly, they didn't have to be the best stories because they were paying for them to go to their audiences who didn't have as many options. Now we're looking at this digital era, which we're going to talk about some, right? And it's kind of survival of the fittest. People are participating in storytelling. They're picking and choosing what kind of media they consume. And so we have to be telling the most important stories about our brands for them to break through to the audiences that we're trying to use. So it can be challenging, but it's also very exciting because we have these audiences engaging with us and spreading our message in a way that wasn't really happening during a more passive era. Okay, let me see if I can get my perfect. So, like I said, we are competing for folks' attention much, much more than we ever have been before. So having those great stories and being strategic about it is more important than ever. It's not enough for us just to be giving people the information about our goods and services. We have to be telling them stories that make them feel connected to our brands, our institutions on a really a moral level, right? Making them feel like their values align with our values. And that's where I feel that those of us working in higher education, our jobs can be pretty easy. There's so many amazing stories that make it very easy to help folks kind of understand why our values align with theirs. And if we tell the right stories, like I mentioned, we can make our audiences brand ambassadors and have them pass along these stories for us in a way where they can reach so many more audiences than they were able to before the advent of social media. So what exactly makes a good story? Every story should have a hero. And I think it can feel like, oh, well, my institution should be the hero, right? But what we found really resonates more with folks is if the hero is kind of someone like them, right? And that hero can be on a quest, and our institution is the one helping them on that quest. Um, we talk some about mirrors and windows too when we're talking about that hero. So there may be a strategic reason that you want that hero to be a mirror of your audience, for them to be able to relate to them and see themselves in that hero in your story. Or there may be a strategic reason where you need that audience to understand someone who is not like them, and that's where the window comes in, right? Providing a window into someone else's life, where you need them to kind of sympathize with them, understand what their experience is. But the key here is that your brand, your institution is always kind of the helper, the mentor on that hero's quest. So you found a great story. That's a great start. That's not always enough, right? There has to be a strategy behind what stories you're telling and why. So starting with the why is absolutely key. What are your strategic goals? And then working backwards to understand how storytelling can advance those. And when I'm talking about goals, it's really important to make sure that your goals are outcome based, not output based. So it isn't, oh, we want to post 10 stories a week. Well, why? You could post 10 pretty bad stories a week and be hitting that goal and maybe not advancing any of your strategic goals. Are you wanting more folks to learn about a certain program? Are you wanting more folks to just even know about your school? Then we need to be looking at engagement, right? How many people are visiting the site? How many people are reading the stories? How many people are sharing the stories? So it's important to consider goals that are outcome based, not output based. Once you've kind of got those goals, then you can craft key messages that support those. So key messages are really main points of information that you want your audience to hear, understand, and remember. What are the 3 things you want your audience to think of or know about when they think of your institution? And they should be directly connected to your goals, and they should be directly connected to your stories, right? They're kind of that bridge. So every story should either illustrate or include one of those kind of key messages. And that can really be helpful to prioritize story and communications. Like I said, in higher ed, I feel like we have a never-ending number of amazing stories. Just students on their journeys are such compelling stories. But not always are they going to serve your goals. And I'll talk about a couple examples where we've had to streamline. So for us here at Indiana University, our kind of key messages, our bridge between our goal and our stories is our strategic plan. So everything we do is telling the story of how Indiana University is inching closer towards the goal set out in the IU 2030 strategic plan. So every story that we write is somehow illustrating one of these 3 pillars: student success, transformative research, service to our state, and beyond. There are plenty of cool stories that come across our desk that don't necessarily include these key messages, and we have to pass. So for example, one of our alumni was just named a new cast member at Saturday Night Live. That's so cool. But he studied business when he was at Indiana University. He was not involved in theater. He was not involved in improv here. So there was not an easy way for us to show how we were that mentor on his quest. So it just was not a strategic story for us to tell, and we passed. Thinking about audience can also help you streamline or prioritize stories, right? Who are you trying to talk to? That's going to be part of your goal, right? A lot of times it's multiple audiences, and one story could be used to reach multiple audiences. Sometimes your audience is going to be pretty general, all alumni. Sometimes it's going to be extremely specific. And because we have these social media tools and these email marketing tools that let us do really, really small segmentation, we can make those very specific. They could be internal audiences, faculty, staff, students. It might be external. We might be wanting media to report the story. We might be wanting legislators to know about what's going on, peer institutions, prospective students, right? Sometimes the same story can apply to all those audiences. Sometimes you can tweak the delivery of those stories. How are you getting that information to those audiences? Sometimes you can just kind of tweak the framing and use that same story for the audience. So really thinking about who you're trying to reach, where they're consuming their media, what they care about, can make our digital storytelling so much more impactful. And being able to stretch the stories as well. And what I mean, we kind of the next step of what I was just referring to, right? The same story may be applicable if you just kind of reframe it a bit. So you maybe have a story that is perfect for a blog section on your website. That same story may be of interest to a reporter, and you want to share that with them so they can pursue their own story. There may be some kind of visual potential, and I will say that every story, when we're talking about digital storytelling, everything we do needs to include an image at the very least, right? No one's going to engage with something on a website or on social media if there aren't images included. And video is even better for that social component. Paying to boost some stories on social media can be extremely affordable. There doesn't need to be a huge advertising budget to make sure that a certain section of your audience sees something on social media. Including these stories in faculty staff newsletters, in student newsletters, in alumni newsletters. Using maybe a tiny part of a story in a paid ad can help stretch these stories. Paying for sponsored content, which is hopefully we all know what sponsored content is, but for those of you who don't, is something that looks like a news story, but you've paid to place it online in an online publication. Maybe you've got a dean who sends out a weekly email, and you can use tidbits from a story you've written in that email, link to it. Just making sure that every time you found a perfect nugget that serves your goals, that you're using it in every way that you can and being strategic about it. So I'm going to provide one example where we did that here at Indiana University. So if you didn't know, Indiana University Bloomington offers more foreign languages than any other university in the country. We are a leader at foreign language instruction, and that includes how we're teaching foreign languages. So anytime we can jump at a story that shows that, we are all about it. And of course, AI is on everyone's brain. It's very newsworthy. So this was a perfect story for us to pursue. We have a faculty member who has been leading really the national conversation about how to use AI tools in foreign language instruction. He traveled internationally throughout the summer to present about this. Because this was such a perfect nugget for us, we repurposed it in so many ways. We had a story on our News at IU site. We shared that across our own social media channels. We pitched it and actually had a reporter from our local newspaper, the Herald Times, write a story about it. And we also incorporated it into paid sponsored content that we ran in the Herald Times and on the broader USA Today network. So just another example of really stretching content when you find that perfect, great story that fits your goals and that can be appealing to more than one audience. And that is all I have for you. I feel like I sped through that, but of course I'm hanging around for the Q&A section, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and kick it over to Charlie.
Great, thank you. So I'll kind of pick up from here. And so, yeah, there are a lot of important building blocks, a lot of important just overall strategy to have in mind as we're talking about storytelling. It comes down to, I love the way you talked about, selecting stories, and I'll say more about this, but I'm going to bring us into the advancement lens here and really talk about, okay, how does this work in an advancement environment? What does it mean when we're talking about storytelling for the kind of work that you are all doing, knowing that curating those stories is a pretty important part of the job. I spent time on campuses early in my career at UMBC in Baltimore and Colgate University in New York and Vanderbilt down here in Nashville. And I used to say, we work in content-rich environments. You walk out the door and you'll stumble over 17 good stories. So the finding of the stories is part of the job. Like Marah, like you said, picking the right stories to tell for the right purpose at the right time to the right people, that's the hard part, right? Because some of the easiest stories to tell just sometimes are the ones that are, they're nice, but maybe they don't really move the ball. Back to what you said, ball down the field, back to what you said before about goals. Why are we bothering to try to earn people's time and attention through storytelling? And we have to be really clear about that. So I always like to start with one of my favorite quotes here, and we can replace fundraising with engagement, but I love this, almost the generosity of it, that what we're doing, fundraising, engagement, activation of our people, it's an invitation in, right? It's so easy to talk about how we need a bigger megaphone. We need to tell people more. We need to be more places. And that's for us. And I really like the idea of just kind of starting out our strategy, starting out conversations like this, talking about we're actually inviting people in. We want them to be a part of it. And I think if we have that in mind, it really helps us frame the kind of stories that we're looking to tell, knowing that the best way to invite people in is to get them interested in our story, right? Get them interested in what are we doing? Tell really good stories about what's going on here and compel people to want to be invited in. And when they are invited, that they'll accept that invitation. Also, and this was said already, but I think it's worth putting a pin in. This is an incredibly noisy time, an incredibly noisy environment. People are bombarded with just a lot of messages and messaging and content and different forms of content. So it's important to recognize for them, not just for us, but for the people we're trying to communicate with, they're getting an awful lot thrown at them, right? They're getting messages from everywhere. We have to respect that and then cut through it. We have to kind of make sure that we've got a story that's worthy of telling to activate them in support of something, right? And for our purposes here in advancement, especially at the law school level or any unit level, is we don't have to tell the whole story, right? We can inherit and leverage the brand story. So what is happening that isn't, that is obviously kind of manifests itself in an advancement? What's going on? What are those big stories that are being told to help connect, inspire, activate, and ultimately engage our alumni and donors, right? How do we make sure that we're using the big story machine, that it's something we've already talked about, so that we're really kind of can focus on, okay, then how do we connect people through those stories? If we're either driving an event strategy, driving a fundraising strategy, and we have to tell the whole story just to say, and wouldn't you like to be a part of this? That's an awful lot. Remember how noisy I was saying it is? It's an awful lot for that storytelling strategy to have to carry. If we can really be integrated with the overall brand story and have a clear connection from what we're about and kind of what we stand for and what we're asking people to do, it makes for a much cleaner segue. And ultimately, if we want people to support what we do, they need to care why we do it and who we do it for, right? So what is that thing that we're asking people, again, whether it's fundraising or a program, if that's the what's that why? It was already mentioned here, but like, what's the why are we even compelled to do that? And then who benefits, right? Obviously the institution benefits, but that's really not quite enough. People have to care about the who, they have to care about the people and see them. And the storytelling is the best way to do that. Help them see our people. It's an example I always like to use. This is a pretty great what. This is Disney Hall out in LA, and it's a magnificent building. And even if you're not going to a performance there, you want to be in it, right? It's really compelling. And this is a great what, right? Think about this as a program or a fundraising opportunity. And boy, look what we made. That's not the point, right? The point is the experience within it, right? This is the kind of the why of it. This is we built this building not just to build a pretty building, but we built this building to facilitate these moments. But I'd push even one click further and say that's not really even the point either. It's not just that we can put on these great performances and host these incredible events. It's to make that happen, right? It's to create a moment of delight. It's to create kind of these moments where people are so moved that they're kind of outside themselves. And if our storytelling can focus, if we're talking about the big building, the pretty building, it's got to come down here. What are the moments we can make happen? What are the stories we could tell about the human impact of what someone can do with us, through us? Again, through volunteerism, through participation in our program, through financial support. What is that human impact that they can help make happen? I love the mention before about the hero of the story. In some ways, you want to give people on the other side of the conversation the idea and just the sense that they can make heroic effort here, right? There are things that we can't do without them, right? And it's not to say we're at a deficit, but if you look at all we've been able to do as an organization, as a school, as a college, in the university, there's something they can participate in that can make it even better. It can make it happen faster, it can make it happen broadly, and it can just bring these experiences up to a new level. And that's why I think that why, as that was said before, is just so important. Always coming back to that why. What are we ultimately trying to achieve here? And understanding as part of that storytelling strategy, it's again, as we're picking stories and choosing how to tell them, what is the why behind each of them? Otherwise, it's just an interesting story. And unfortunately, we're not all just in the telling interesting stories business, right? We're in the telling interesting stories that move people. They move conversations, they move relationships. So why-driven storytelling and advancement ultimately is getting down to starting with, and not in the telling of the story, but really having a strong grounding in what do we stand for? What do we stand for as this law school at this college university? What's the thing, and not saying, the brand differentiation that we use for student recruitment or whatever. It's really, what's the place we hold in our people? When we talk to our alumni, our donors, the people who invest and engage, what's the piece of them that they say, you represent this to me. You represent this in my community. That's what I mean. That's the thing that you stand on as an organization. And then what do you seek? What's your something bigger? What are you getting after? What do you see in the environment right now that, again, as you're telling stories, it's leading to something. We're doing something special because we have to, because this is what we stand for, right? So it's kind of that logic of we stand for something, so we must do something bigger. And then why does it matter to our people? Do we know do they care about that? Right? Does that issue, does that cause, does that program, whatever, resonate with them as people we're engaging with? And then how can they be a part of it? That's that invitation piece, right? So that's, again, through the advancement lens, we've got to think about that call to action, that invite that lets people see themselves as part of that story. And I usually talk about that as tailwind, right? So we're inheriting all the tailwind of these bigger things about what we stand for, what we seek, why they care about it. That's the tailwind that allows us to kind of tell this story that's got a lot of momentum behind it. We're not trying to ask people, gosh, we're not really doing a whole heck of a lot. Like, can you help us out? No, it's, we're going, we've got momentum, we've got trajectory, and you could be a part of it. And that's where the storytelling strategy can really help in terms of that call to action. So just an example here, and I'm sure there are many more in the room, but from a campaign storytelling, fundraising campaign storytelling standpoint, I thought Boston College has a nice flow that kind of follows that model, where they're in a big comprehensive campaign for the college writ large, soaring higher, and they're writing the next chapter of our history, right? So this is, I'm sure everybody either has been, will be, or is in a campaign at some point that's part of the larger organization. So this is what's happening across the institution. And then here's where we start to look at, okay, as part of the storytelling, we're going to pull it through to the law school. And then, so what do you stand for? You know, as you look in the content strategy, as they start to kind of seed the story about, we've got this big campaign, it's going to do something grand. So what do you stand for as the law school, since you're a part of it? And service and scholarship, which you can make an argument, kind of anybody can talk about, but they've claimed that as part of, you know, part of their positioning for this campaign. What I liked about this is that as part of that, and this, as you can see, it's not a lot of words here, but the story they're telling about what they're going to stand for in this campaign is that, you know, their opportunities are built upon the Jesuit Catholic values of discernment and care for the whole person. So they've taken this kind of, we've got a big campaign, law is part of it, service and scholarship is part of it, but you, as an alum, as a donor prospect, know that this is about who we are. And that's different from other places. It's probably different from other places that you support, that you've been a part of. This is part of your experience. So they've figured, you know, they've zeroed right in on that value proposition for the folks who they're telling these campaign stories to. And then what do they seek? Well, they're looking at what's to come here, and they see that they've accomplished a whole lot. You know, the story they're telling is about, you know, momentum and trajectory, but they don't go so far as to say, you know, there are risks ahead, but they've identified that there are some waters ahead. If we're following the sailing metaphor here, there are some waters ahead to say, we've got to step forward in terms of financial support for students. We've got to look at our academic programs because there are shifts in the market. There are shifts in the environment that will make it necessary for us to do something if we are to earn our next 100 years. So that, again, the story they're telling here is about kind of the place that has remarkable history, that has a clear identity, but we've got work to do to maintain our position or retain our position and grow it. And why does it matter to them? Because you care about the legal profession, and they care about, you know, lawyers who are trained to fiercely advocate for particular client views. Again, I'm not talking about long form storytelling here. This is, you know, these are kind of pullouts, but they're using their people to tell the story about what they're called to do and why this campaign is necessary. And then how can you be a part of it? Well, they lay it out here. You know, there's a campaign to be had. And I'm sure for all their prospects, you know, they'll have very specific stories about what they can do to help. But they're saying that this campaign is necessary. Your support is necessary if you care about these things. So I just think this is a nice example of how a place, you know, has taken this grand campaign story and really localized it and owned it all the way down to, and for our community, here's what we need to do. Having said all that, that's the scaffolding. This is Disney Hall again. This is the bones, the steel, and the concrete of how we tell our stories. What's really most important here is knowing who our people are, right? So we can spend a lot of time institutionally, organizationally, on this end of it, figuring out our storytelling strategy, what we want people to know, think, and do. But we've got to really make sure we understand them, right? Our stories only resonate if they resonate with the people on the other side of the conversation. What topics do they care about? You know, what do they want to support? How do they want to help? You know, usually, you know, organizations like, you know, those of us who are doing the work that we do in this room here have a decent amount of information about profile. You know, through a database, we might have a sense of kind of their academic profile, there's a study, their career, you know, what's available by kind of a little bit of research. So what can we know about our people as we're thinking about the stories we want to tell and the things we're hoping they'll be a part of? And then how do those match up with our people? And do we need to tell every story to everybody? Or are there ways to think about our audience in different ways? We can shape our storytelling strategy around, these are the people who probably care about this most. This probably resonates most with this segment of people. And the segment isn't about year, and it's not really about geography. It's more about kind of what their passion points are and what the topics that really resonate with them are. So how does what they care about, resonate with what you do, right? What you do as a college, as a school, and as a community? there'll be a lot of things they care about, want to support, and want to help that have nothing to do with what you do. So it's carving out from that noise, carving out that piece of what the area that you can really own. A couple of examples here. The Duke Law magazine and the online magazine is remarkable. It's just, if you're looking for digital storytelling done well, obviously this requires a lot of resources, but they do a great job of a number of things here, right? They're using digital really well. If you look through even this story, I think it's still on the homepage of the Duke Law magazine site. They're really using the technology to tell stories well, right? It's not just kind of blocks of content, but the pacing, the visuals they use, the way they pull out. These are kind of just going back to what was said earlier, just some best practices about how you use, digital platforms to do digital storytelling. Because there are some assets that we have that are just make for a great user experience. But so there's that part of it. There's also just, they've picked a topic that is timely, it's relevant. They have a play on it as Duke Law. Their readers, if it's the magazine for those who care about Duke Law, their readers are thinking about AI, because who's not right now, right? So this is a story that's compelling to the reader. It's important to Duke Law because it's a thing they're working on. So we're making a connection point around this is something we're doing. This is something you care about. Let's have a conversation through this kind of story, and I'm sure other pieces about, like, here's where we're going. And I would imagine there are also some opportunities to engage around it from an event standpoint, online programming, and I'm sure fundraising as well. NYU Law does a nice job in terms of, I'm sure there are others out there who do some, what we're calling lately intellectual engagement. The storytelling from the Duke piece is similar, but where can we pick a topic, pick an expert, an alum, a faculty member who have a point of view on a certain issue, and we can have a conversation about it, right? People benefit from being part of our community, this particular school or college's community, because they had an experience here and we're talking about topics people care about. That's important engagement where we can really express kind of our expertise and our play on the issues in a way that resonates with our community. And ultimately, as we think about inviting people in, effective storytelling isn't always the last part of it isn't always come to this event, make this gift. Sometimes the effective storytelling is just there to help you earn the right to make an ask, right? If you jump from kind of, we don't talk at all, or we just blast stuff at you, and then all of a sudden we say, shouldn't you make your gift now? Wouldn't you like to come to this event? We're kind of missing something. And I really like to talk about it as earning it, earning the right to make that ask, that you've taken the time to find and tell those stories, to know who they are and what they care about. So ultimately you've earned that moment to say, wouldn't you like to come to this? Wouldn't you like to support this? Because it feels like a relationship that's grown over time, even just through storytelling. No one wants to feel like an ATM. and it's not enough just to rely on loyalty, on pride. A lot of times through annual giving, I think we see a little bit too much reliance on pride, on loyalty, on just pure competition. And, it's not quite enough. Or if it's enough, for some people, there probably means there's more they're willing to do if you earn some more of that right to ask a little bigger, ask a little deeper. So paying off, all of this is true for storytelling overall. And, in thinking about digital storytelling strategy, there are some things that make it different, but good storytelling is good storytelling, right? So how are we using the digital means at our disposal to do all the work that we've been talking about here? I think really it's putting the story at the core and then making sure we're just using our different platforms, whether you're, a big school or college or a small one, or you have a lot of people or not a lot of people. There are just a lot of, if you think about the stories at the hub, what are the assets at our disposal? Some of them are, our digital platforms, your website, which is really kind of the core here. LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, but how are you using that story in your events? How are you using it in, do you have a newsletter or a magazine? Not everything, a lot of resources, but really this is for everybody.
Great, great. So we have a
Yes.
few questions in the chat for you. So if it's all
Sure.
right with you. Okay, so one of them kind of related to that hub picture that you showed, but many of us have small alumni pools, small staff. How do we efficiently try to communicate to those segmented interests with limited ability to create multiple narratives?
Yeah. So I think the slide that probably broke the presentation it was we hit that point of I don't know that I actually wouldn't say have different strategies for the different platforms, different strategies, but not creating specific content for each platform. I would say you can take one piece of content, one story, and then amplify it, right? Not everyone's going to spend a lot of time reading deeply on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook, but they might discover it there. They might find it there, and then you could pull them back into the website. So I'd say just focus first on telling really great stories and then kind of promote them and feed them out because people will show up in different places. And I wouldn't worry so much about saying we need to tell certain stories for Twitter because we have certain people there, or for LinkedIn or for Facebook. I think just amplifying the stories and the platforms that you have is a great way to, one, make sure your reach is extended, and two, I mean, no one has enough resources to tell a ton of stories. So making sure that you're just making the most of your efforts.
Yeah, the only thing I agree, and the only thing I'd add there is I think if you know mostly young people are following you on Instagram, mostly you have your old audience on LinkedIn, whatever it may be. I think the actual words you put in the post can be framed differently to engage that audience. But the big lift, the bigger content that's going to be on your website can be the same. So that's kind of how we approach it, is just framing those hooks a little differently, but the big content is the same.
And Marah and Charlie, thank you both for dedicating your time to us today. I know there's a ton of questions from the 150 people that we have watching today. There was somebody who messaged me directly, actually, and was sort of chuckling a bit because, of course, attorneys like to say a lot of things and a lot of words, and we love them for that. But when you go and look at the analytics, as you kind of alluded to, like, wow, there's no way they could have read this 3-column newspaper story, so to speak, in 48 seconds. So I think you bring up such important points about how to make it consumable for all of our different audiences. Okay, there
Heather,
was
can I
one
add one
more.
other point there? I think one, the analytics are great in terms of helping us figure exactly that this thing that we know would actually take 4 minutes to read, they'd read for 16 seconds. So how do we shape the content to meet the appetite, right? Don't fill the plate too much if we know they can only eat a little. The other thing is use the analytics to help storytelling strategy, but also help, those are people, right? The metrics are people. And I think it's another kind of good just mental tip to think about, the stories that people are reading help us understand our constituency better. And if we really care about something and really want people to know it and they're not reading it, it might not be because we're not hitting them enough, or we need to also tell it somewhere else. It might mean they don't actually care as much as we think they do. So it could, we might test a little bit or something, but metrics are actually, feedback, and if you're speaking into the ether, that might mean that you need to tell some different stories.
Thank you so much. Okay, I found the second question, and I know there's a third in the Q&A. This was kind of related to the Venn diagram that you were showing. And Marah, I'm sure you have good feedback on this too. How do you handle saying no to important constituents when they want a story and it does not apply to your strategic plan or to the questions that you're asking?
Mary, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, definitely. I joke often that politely declining is like my profession, right? I think that if you have really clear goals, it's very easy to do this. I found most people are extremely receptive if you can say, this is our goal, this is why, and here's kind of why this doesn't fit. Folks will be receptive. If you don't have that strategy and you're just kind of like, nah, not into this, it's a lot harder to say no. I'd be lying if I said we didn't do stories that don't always fit with our goals, because what we call a SWAT situation, someone with a title wants it, that happens, right? And I think that all happens to all of us, it's going to. But the clearer the goals you have are, the easier it is to decline. And we often also like to do what we call no but. So for that SNL example, no, we're not going to write a story for the IU newsroom about this, but social media is happy to post a congratulations on their story, right? And then they're at least, you at least don't feel like you're just shutting folks down. You're giving them, that's a better audience because young people who know him are there. So those are kind of my two tips for that. But we're not always successful.
I would just add, oh, that's awesome, and I love the SWAT thing. Sometimes just a little inventory of, here are all the outlets that we have access to, the website, if there's a magazine or a newsletter or whatever. Here's our audience, here's the purpose, and here are the kind of stories that fit in. And using that with colleagues around to say, hey, it's going to be most helpful to hear these stories for this purpose. And then also knowing, again, in fundraising, a lot of times it's understanding why they're trying to tell the story, why it needs to go in the magazine or on the website or through PR. It's actually stewardship and helping people. That's the purpose of it. So helping people understand that's probably not the best way to steward the donor. We can see if there's a story we could tell around that gift, but let's think about some really one-to-one things that we could do to help them, make them feel special about the gift. That'll be way more powerful. Sometimes that horse has way left the barn, back to the SWAT thing, but it's education. So I think helping people understands, what tools you and they have at their disposal to either promote or steward or, just tell stories about what's going on there.
Yeah, and I would say I've found the more we educate people about our goals, the less often we're getting pitched stories that don't align with what our goals are, right? So, or they're coming to us framing a certain story in a way they know aligns with our goals. So it hopefully can be a little bit of a ripping a Band-Aid off, right? You're doing that education up front, and then they learn themselves, and you're not having to say no as much.
Okay, we have another question specific to giving days that I received a message about. So a lot of us, have to be part of giving days, but oftentimes the messaging is very big and broad about the university, and then what our goals or strategies are as the law school are quite different. So the question was basically, how do you go with the flow? You've kind of answered this to an extent, and participate, but still stay true to, what your why and your strategy is.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to drop in some of the slides I didn't get to. We're actually riffing off of Cornell's Giving Day, because they do some really fun things. Part of it, I think, is, Giving Days have so much, use whatever word, promotion, bluster. They have gravitational force around them. Part of it is the personality. How do you want to show up as law during the Giving Day? Because the tone might actually feel a little bit different from the overall institution. So that's one, what's the attitude? What's the kind of the tone again of communications? Do you have the ability to throttle a little bit and control for how much people are getting? Are they going to get everything? Will they just get things from you? I think that's part of it. How much negotiation room do you have in that, especially with dual degree folks? And then the other part is just two things. One, how does it fit into the overall conversation that you're having with folks? Just the rhythm of communications that are in programming. And then all of a sudden, if Giving Day just shows up and kicks the door in, it'll feel weird. So, again, how does it fit into your overall communication and programming for the year? And then not every school, college unit experiences a Giving Day's impact the same, where for undergrad alum, it might feel like the big bump. At the law level, it might be nice. And again, this depends on the place, might be nice, but there are other opportunities that resonate more. I think having those conversations with, if there's a central team driving it, just making sure that there's a point of view on the table about, of course, we want to be a part of this institution-wide effort, but let's just right size expectations and volume around where it fits in with the conversation.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. Really understanding if there is a central office that's running this, understanding who they're talking to and what they're saying, and if there is something that's missing, filling that gap, but also making sure they're understanding your goals and how those can align is helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of our folks that work in this space in law feel caught in the middle because they know they have to go with the flow. As you said, they don't have much negotiation room, but they keep shouting like, wait, our grads don't wear that color robes. Like that can clearly not be us. So stop
Yeah.
sending those out,
Yeah.
but it's hard because as you said, for the undergrad, it's often a huge bump.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
just different. And I think, again, each organization, each institution tends to be a little bit different in how well they understand that, especially law. I mean, law is a lot of times culturally, kind of conversation wise, is just feels like a different tone. And like I said, even colors, just the people might not resonate with the mascot running around campus. They don't know what it is. They might not have spent a whole lot of time on campus. So, or even that campus. So I think helping those driving communication essentially understand that we've got folks in the room that we're communicating with who might have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. Okay, I think there's one more question from Jamie, and then we're going to wrap it up. So go ahead, Jamie.
Thanks, Heather. And thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Marah. I'm assuming, some of our groups have international populations in addition to the domestic. Vast majority are domestic populations. If we're segmenting out the international audiences, I'm wondering if you have any best practices or lessons learned from either of your areas on communicating with them and what we might take away from today's talk on that topic.
Mary, you want to start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm fortunate that I've got colleagues and our vice president for international affairs who recruit and help kind of retain our international students, and we rely heavily on them. But I know those folks are communicating with a lot of those groups through WeChat, just like platforms that are more popular internationally than here. And also I would say something that we prioritize is keeping tabs on what's happening internationally and being sensitive to what may be happening in their realm of the world and how that may be impacting their lives, and being proactive about making sure they have the resources or know about the resources that can help them here from the university. I'm trying to think. Also, just making sure that we center international stories so they don't feel like you're coming to the middle of the country in Indiana. Maybe not everyone is expecting that there is a large international student population or that we teach more foreign languages than any other university in the country. So making sure that we're telling the stories that portray us as a global university, even though that may be not the first thing you see. I hope that answers that question. I don't do a ton of direct communication to international students, so I might not have all the info to answer that question.
I would just add, especially for places that don't have, the ability to create like many cuts of communications, making sure that for those who might be international, that they don't feel left out, right? That if there's programming happening that it would take them 15 hours to get to, make sure they're programming that might take them an hour, even if it's online, just again, to kind of recognizing where they are and not making really highlighting how far away they are. The storytelling strategy, there should be stories that resonate with everybody, but not kind of making them feel excluded, by just distance through kind of, there are all these opportunities I'd love for you to be a part of. It's physically impossible.
Yeah. And we're lucky here in Indiana University, we have, when we're talking about alumni, we have global gateway offices throughout the world. I forget how many we have at this point, but they're wonderful resources to engage alumni in those areas and also recruit prospective students. And we tap into those networks to figure out what's going on in those regions, often from a storytelling capacity.
Well, Charlie and Marah, thank you so much again for being here today. So many great nuggets of information. I'm sure you'll be hearing from our section with more questions.